Okay, it's time for Jerry and the Goddesses, Part 27. Sarissa's new avatar looked tired. She looked up at me from Sarissa's hand, made the eat me gesture, then heaved a sigh. It would have been a little discouraging if it wasn't for her outfit. The tiny little copy wore a tan collared shirt, khaki pants, brown lumber boots, a brown leather jacket, and a wool felt fedora. The leather holster her right hand rested on had a flap that covered the gun, and the curls of a bullwhip peeked out from under the jacket. And apparently, Inanna might have been involved a bit in her appearance because the shirt was open to the waist, exposing an expanse of flesh and a good chunk of her breast. I made a face, but picked up the tiny, sexy Indiana Jones and tilted my head back. She slapped a hand down on her hat and cannonballed into my mouth. The brief, squirming, choking sensation gave way to a sense of familiarity with our surroundings. I looked around. The church was pretty clearly a vault. It had been cut from the solid rock, just like the better-known examples in Lalabella. That was where the resemblance ended, however. For one thing, the rock ceiling was still there. I wondered what the glitch in the satellite imagery had been obfuscating, because as best I could tell, there wasn't much visible from the ground. Maybe the opening in the side of the hill, though I'm sure it looked quite natural from the air. I was also sure that I could spot and identify it with my newfound archaeological skills, however, so maybe that was it, hiding it from the experts specifically. Rather than a cruciform chapel, this was a solid block, mostly undecorated, with a single slightly protruding front door frame that niggled at my unconscious as out of place. The door itself was another solid block of stone fitted tightly into the frame. Sarissa and I walked around the structure, checking out the walls on either side as well as the floor. Nothing jumped out at us. "Does that door bother you as well?" I asked her after we'd completed a circuit. Sarissa nodded. "There's something about it that fits, but nonetheless seems out of place." I stared at the doorframe. "When do you think this was built?" "I'm thinking early Middle Ages." "The frame or the structure?" Sarissa asked idly, and that's when it clicked. "That's it," I said. "What?" Sarissa turned to me, confusion on her face, and I felt a moment of vindication. For the first time ever, I'd gotten the upper hand on her. I grinned and silenced the niggling voice that reminded me that the knowledge I'd used to puzzle this out had come from the avatar of archaeology and, apparently, engineering I had just swallowed. "Shut up, stupid voice of doubt. Let me enjoy this." "The door," I said. "Notice the way it bulges out in the center a little?" Sarissa frowned and moved forward, running her hands over the door. And then it clicked. "Oh my, it's designed to withstand blasts." I grinned wider. "Pretty weird for an early medieval structure, right?" "So it was built later, maybe? Late 19th century, perhaps?" I shrugged. It was impossible to tell, at least for me. "Can you review what happened in this area since the invention of TNT? I mean, I know Fulla will obfuscate anything to do with the construction, but perhaps you can figure out if there were any construction projects going on out here since then." Sarissa held up a finger. "Already on it, dear." I gave her some time to review. I mean, she had over a century's worth of activity in a large region to review. I didn't know how long it would take her to do it, so I took another look around. The chipping on the sides didn't match late 19th century stone cutting techniques. It really looked early medieval to me. I knelt down and stirred my fingers in the sand and dust, producing a potsherd. I examined the fragment. The edges were heavily worn, and there wasn't a single trace of any sort of finish. As I pondered the shard, I heard Sarissa approach. "Anything?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. Fulla is good, but she's not perfect. She can't be. There would be some trace, some clue I could have found. This structure was not built since the invention of TNT." "It seems over-engineered for a gunpowder explosion. Do you think that's just being careful?" She shook her head. "No, before the invention of nitroglycerin, nobody ever knew that features like this would help, because they didn't have explosives that they could do testing with. No physicists were modeling it either, even though they mostly had the maths for it. So what we seemed to have was a structure built by all signs in the early Middle Ages, but designed to withstand explosives. And we still had to get inside. Can you open the door? Sarissa shrugged. I don't see why not, unless Fulla is actively protecting her secret from us. Here, I should be able to move it. She beckoned me to follow and headed back to the front. When we got there, Gary had wandered in. He had his own rifle, not one of Inanna's materialized ones. I recognized the name on the side, AT&T. Gary had explained it to me way back in Afghanistan as the tool he used to reach out and touch someone. Y'all ain't even gone in yet? Sarissa smiled at him but didn't answer. She positioned herself in front of the door and held up her hands. The door began to vibrate as I responded to Gary. We were trying to figure out how old it is, I explained. So what's the verdict? Early Middle Ages, maybe 6th or 7th century? That would be before the Viking Age, but after the fall of Rome. Gary nodded. He wasn't exactly uneducated. I had learned by underestimating his knowledge many times, but non-military history wasn't his strong suit. He'd be familiar with both of the bookends I mentioned, owing to the prominent military affairs that took place during them. Awfully old, he commented. I nodded. Yeah, and get this. That door seems designed to withstand a blast. Gary blinked. That's well before gunpowder, isn't it? I nodded. By several centuries, yeah, and it's built to withstand explosives, not just gunpowder. Well, ain't that fucking prescient. I looked at Sarissa, who seemed to be struggling. I wanted to ask her about what was going on, but I was afraid to interrupt, so I turned back to Gary. Everything quiet out there? He nodded. Kathy's out there with Anna. She seems to like that MP5SD Anna magicked up for her quite a bit. Doing some target practice using the trees scattered around. She got talent. She ain't you with your natural dead eye, but she certainly ain't bad. She might even be a little better than you at the shooting and scooting stuff, he added, eyeing me to see if I'd react. I nodded. I was perfectly fine with anyone else being better than me at that sort of thing. If you're looking for jealousy, I told him, you should know that I'm perfectly fine with being an absolute weenie when it comes to that stuff. My ego is happy enough having a PhD. And speaking a couple of dozen languages and having the literal goddess of fuck as a girlfriend, he added with a wink. I grinned. Yes, in some ways I was actually someone that others could be jealous of. It felt good. Well, when I wasn't being terrified by Inanna's libido or overhearing people discuss how pathetic I was in a language they didn't think I'd understand. My grin faded and I sighed. Sarah, how's it going? Gary called, recognizing that a change of subject was in order. Sarissa lowered her hands and turned back to us. I can't do it, she said. Fulla must be opposing me. You think Anna could? Or maybe the both of you? Hell, I'm sure Jerry could get Ixie to give it a try.